point number 1 comes straight out of the recent numeracy class. The state of topological transitivity, or the interaction of 3 or more differential equations, is the minimum requirement for chaos. Chaos in the sense of tumble, who knows what, oh my god, and oh, but that changes everything. I just tried to do that and it didn't work. And all these things caroming off of one another so that if you try to follow a particle or whatever, you'll just get dizzy and it won't illuminate anything about a larger phenomenon. A larger phenomenon might not even happen. And you state of chaos. It's deterministic in that all these things touch each other and cause each other. I mean, there's nothing mystical going on here, but there's just so many of them, and there's so many hassles that emerge. Okay, so that's getting into chaos. Dice resolutions and the usage of any technique of play that we can actually discuss as mechanical, or another way to put it is that is procedurally constrained. If it serves toward increasing the chaos or contributing to getting into that state, that's its function in the larger theoretical sense. Instantly, you can see why people who design dice and stuff so that we get out of chaos, we come back down into a non-chaotic state where everything just kind of is, handled one at a time. This does that. Next turn. That does this. Next turn. Okay, what happens then? Okay, this scene is over. Flat. Stop. One person think. Okay, well then now this next scene is next in line or something like that. But maybe that last bit about scenes doesn't help. But the deal here is that it was the stop that helped, that I wanted to talk about. The idea that, the scene that you finished is over and has no impact, on the next thing. That would be like having rooms that you go to sequentially and everything in the room is just frozen as written, until you get there. So that's what I mean by not entering chaos. Oh, and by the way, since a lot of play is totally non-chaotic in that regard, except in the middle of a fight, that's why people either who are terrified of it avoid the fights, or people who want that get into the fights, among other reasons. But at a larger theoretical sense, that's actually a big deal. Okay, if you're with me on this, and perhaps even wondering, well, why would I want chaos in a state of play? That's when everybody argues, right? No, that's not when everybody argues. That's when the fiction becomes entirely, or in specific ways, unpredictable. So we've got, and can it be crap, right? Can, the unpredictable creation of fiction just turn into blither and be bad? Absolutely. In fact, if that's not a potential phenomenon, you're not in chaos. What Ibars refers to as setting and themes, not the same things, but related, both as things that we experience, things that we are confirmed by, that are a huge part of saying, I played this game and I had a great time, implicitly using those procedures, implicitly with these people. It comes from a state which is only achievable once the chaos state has been achieved. In chaos theory, they're called strange attractors. There's lots of other terms and other kinds of, complex systems theory. But for our purposes, we can talk about what we do and how we feel, what happened in the fiction, how much we liked it, maybe not even able to articulate precisely how, but I often describe it as looking back on what has happened and aesthetically feeling like that was inevitable this time. I don't mean inevitable when everybody does it. I mean inevitable this time for this group. We look back on this fiction and we say, it had to turn out that way. That's the aesthetic sense upon looking at ourselves. Maybe even experience it in the moment, roll, holy shit, that had to happen. When we know damn well it didn't have to happen. The dice could have bounced a different way, or the person could have said something different, or whatever. We know it didn't have to happen. But aesthetically, the confirmatory excitement of looking at it and going, that had to be. Even when it's bad for your character. That sense of inevitability that it had to be is why in any fiction, why we like it sometimes. When the character that we rooted for, when the circumstances that we hope for don't happen. How that occurs in other media like books, movies, etc., as opposed to the bad thing happening, you go, oh, geez, you didn't have to do that, author, that's just totally gratuitous. You're just fucking with me. Right? We've been in those situations, both of them. We've read books and been in movies where objectively this character had this thing happen to them. And in the one case, we grieve and feel cathartic or, whatever psychological term you want. But we say, but that's just the way it had to be. Even though it didn't have to be that way. I mean, author dude could have said something else. But we feel that way. Same thing here in role-playing. Okay, so in terms of the setting turning out to be the way that we now know it, in terms of the characters' fates being what they are, the immediate situation turning differently, all of those things are involved in what we call theme. You want to debate about what theme is? I got a whole bag of this right there. Okay, can we just get past that? If we look at it this way and recognize that these are phenomena that occur only from a state of chaos, that they are in fact contingent. You can have hurricane weather with the not having when a hurricane doesn't happen this time. That occurs. Same thing here. But in either case, it's not magic. In either case, there's a certain degree of those interactions, a certain quality of the medium at that time, which gets us to hurricane, which gets us to setting and theme. The fact that every single hurricane is a little different or even a lot different from a number of other hurricanes is important. And again, not magic. It has to do with what were those properties. What aspects of the chaotic interactions were more furious than others? The medium itself, the atmospherics globally, right? At that time for a hurricane, what's the equivalent for role-playing? You're looking at one, and you can look at another one in a mirror. The medium of us listening to one another. These are where we get our theme and meaning. So the role of a dice system in, no pun intended, ROLE, the impact of a dice system. Remember, you're talking about resolution and dice, or even situational elements in dice, like, rolling for wandering monsters or dungeon design or venture components or something, as well as, throwing the spear through the guy. All these have value insofar as we look at their interactions with all the other components of play in the medium and see whether they can contribute to chaos. The process of hitting the strange attractor, oops, the word. The process of hitting, in this case, settings and themes is a second, well, actually sort of a fifth order phenomenon from there. Again, not magic. We do get hurricanes because the Earth's air has properties. We do get settings and themes because humans have properties. So if we look at it this way, then having successfully played, we look back and we say, wow, that particular die roll, due to the probabilities of dice in this game, due to what we roll for in this game as opposed to another, boy, that really contributed, didn't it? But it didn't make the theme, not that one roll. In isolation, the very same roll for the very same thing with a lot less going on. When I say an isolation, let's just say we, turn play into just a room where we're just interested in whether that happens. And we look at it there, it's not going to have that property at all. Just like a given set of atmospheric interactions in a particular place, temperatures and otherwise, don't have a little hurricane in it. This is not an analogy, right? So when we look at my game Sorcerer, what was the process of creating Sorcerer? We go all the way back to 1978 and my looking at Wizard, the fantasy trip Wizard, and saying, this is hitting something that none of these other things are hitting for me. And we look at the system, which has these simple units of attributes, and in this case has a 3d6 or less roll based on those attributes as target numbers. You have to get, you have a dexterity of 11, then you want to roll 11 or less on 3d6 to cast your spell. You also have a resource, strength. You burn it by casting the spells and taking damage too. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, this has an elegance to it and a directness to it. And I also really liked the summoning rules. There's cool creation rules for objects, for images, for illusions, for real things, for demons. And I was like, ooh, look at those. The fantasy trip comes out, sort of puts more nuances with lesser and greater demons and stuff like that. And I'm like, So, armed with this, armed then with frustration in the, around 1990 for what has been going on with both fantasy and with role-playing, which is best described by Shadowrun. There were three trajectories of game design in the 80s that people sort of cleaved to separately. One is BRP. One is collectively champions and GURPS, especially as the former came to look like the latter by 1989. But there's a lot of games in there that are kind of in that zone of proto-GURPS, GURPS, post-GURPS, right? And champions kind of factoring into that as a major player. That's happening. Then you have the third, which is whatever it is that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons thinks it's doing in the shitstorm of the Satanic Panic, the attempted buyout of TSR by Gygax and Menser, which fails, and the successful buyout by the Williams family, and the shift into, all the publications during that time, which are really, really various, and then that coalescing into second edition D&D. Okay, so GURP Supers, and Champions 4th edition, Dungeons & Dragons, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, and really a very distinctive form of BRP, which is now sort of the baseline for all these other games, indirectly as well as licensed. These are the big schools of game design. Shadowrun basically goes nip, 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 crams a bunch of crap from all of these together, and that's Shadowrun. It becomes the core of what occurs for the 90s. Everyone says that, along with its huge row of supplements and scenarios and stuff like that, and additions, and we're going to do that. All right, so there's sort of your game design history thing in a nutshell that I'm facing in the early 90s and going, what a god-awful mess. Now, do you even play, bro? And I have various epiphanies based on Over the Edge, serious illness, various other things, and I pull out Fighting Fantasy, run, play the Crown of Kings a few times, and I go digging back in my old games, and I say, you know what? Fucking Wizard, man. I mean, where did I lose sight? Where did I lose what I was doing? So I tried to play, the In the Labyrinth again, and I stripped it down, and was discovering I didn't want to play In the Labyrinth. I wanted to play, Amped Wizard. And I was learning from Over the Edge and reading Amber and going, that's not where I'm going. And Sorcerer formed there. Now, where are we talking about the dice system then? First of all, if you look at the Sorcerer dice system, it is very much like the fantasy trip, except that instead of counting the pips on the dice, you're treating the dice as units. Now, at the time, that was not entirely unheard of, but it was rare. Later systems, independently or otherwise, hit upon saying the die is on off. In my case, it was probably Prince Valiant, where it's, they're coins. You flip a coin, which is a two-sided die. Well, in this case, though, I hit upon the notion that we are not actually counting successes per die, which is the Shadowrun and White Wolf thing, Prince Valiant thing. Each unit yields a success, or not. In my case, I was interested in, coordinate space, multidimensional analysis, where it was the relative position of the dice to one another, which I wanted to be an issue. Changes up, it takes away the mitigation problem, right? Where I get this many successes, you counter it with that many successes, while still having a confrontational system, but every die always counts until you hit the bottom limit for that particular roll. Okay, cool. But the idea is, okay, and therefore instead of 3 dice 6 with pips on the dice, then what do the numbers have to be if the dice become the units? And you look at that and you go, oh, divide by 3. So instead of 32 points for a starting character, which is what you have in Wizard, you have 10 in Sorcerer.